I'm going to introduce everybody. We're live now, and I welcome everyone to Creator Exchange. And it's really a pleasure to have both of you here. My name is Will Butler. I'm the VP of Community at Be My Eyes, which is the biggest visual support platform in the world that allows you to lend your eyes to people who need it. Thanks to Outpost, B&H, and everybody who helped put this on, Do Stuff Media. And I'm really pleased to welcome Cristina Mittermeier and Danny Clinch. Thank you guys both for being here today.
Happy to be here.
Such a delight to be here. I've been excited all week.
Yeah, I've seen the email threads going back and forth, and I'm like, hold off, guys, hold off. We're going to talk later this week. Like, that's the whole point, right? Have you guys ever met before?
No, but I think I didn't know so much about Danny as I knew about his work, which is a compliment, Danny.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, for the sake of some introductions for those who are watching who may not have met both of you, Cristina Mittermeier, you're known for your fabulous work with National Geographic. You've gone on to establish your own organization, Sea Legacy, and now have this new project, which we'll talk about, the Only One platform. But how would you sum up in sort of a succinct way what it is that you love taking photographs of?
Because most of my work really has to do with the environment. Science, I realize, is not the way to bring people in, but photography opens a huge door to invite people into the most important conversation of our life. So that's why.
Beautiful. And Danny, I would say one of the most renowned and respected musical photographers of this time we're living in now. You've photographed everyone that, from the list of the greats, from Johnny Cash to Ray Charles to, of course, Pearl Jam and others. And you are a film director and just a musician yourself. But when someone asks you at a party who might not recognize you, what do you do? What do you say?
Well, I say that I love music. I've been using the phrase music is medicine a lot lately. The idea that music can be the soundtrack to your good times, to your rough times, helping you get through the rough times. I think that's what's really important for me. And, I've been a big fan of the document as a photographer, documentary photography and filmmaking. And I feel like it's my opportunity to document history when it comes to music. Starting early in hip hop, in the early 90s, I photographed the Nas Illmatic record, which is a legendary record. I did Kanye West's first record, John Legend's first two, and a lot of other hip hop. I took a photograph of Tupac that is pretty legendary that ended up on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine when he passed away. And then I was able to, go into photographing a lot of my other musical heroes, from Johnny Cash and Neil Young and Willie Nelson and that sort of thing. And I would say that, I'm fortunate that through my camera, I have these great life experiences. And that's one of the joys to me, are the people I meet and the experiences I get through my photography.
You get starstruck?
Starstruck?
No, come on.
We'll get into that. But I think, Cristina, a lot of people know all about your connection with our world's oceans and with the ocean and the sea in general. But folks might not necessarily know your connection, Danny. Can you tell us a little bit about where you're located, where you're calling in from now today?
Oh, yeah. I'm on the Jersey Shore in New Jersey, just below Asbury Park. I do live on a little cove just off of a river. And I felt like when I first realized that Cristina and I were going to have a conversation, I thought, oh, we have a couple of things in common. And it was funny. I brought up my love of the ocean and the artists that I know and love, like Jack Johnson and Eddie Vedder, Pearl Jam, and that, who love the ocean. And we seem to have a lot of mutual friends. When she was like, "Oh yes, I know Eddie, and he's been so kind to me," and I was like, "He's been kind to me too." And you know, Jack Johnson and all that. So yeah, so I grew up near the ocean. I'm literally 7 minutes from the ocean here. I was a swimmer when I was in high school, and therefore I was a lifeguard on the ocean when I was a kid. And I have great respect for the ocean. And I'm a bodyboarder, so I love to surf in that way, and I can ride a longboard as well, which I love. And my buddy and I, Tim Donnelly, H.M. Woolman, and Tim Sweetwood started a music festival called See Here Now, which is on the beach in Asbury Park. And one of the things that I thought was I could brag about to Cristina, because she's doing all this great work for conservation, is that we pride ourselves in doing what's right after having a show on the beach. And we partnered up with Surfrider. We partner up with Surfrider Foundation. We have the C3, which is our production company, has Rock and Recycle. We think about the green initiatives that we have. And we, in fact, won the All at Once Sustainability Award for music festivals from Jack and Kim Johnson, who do the Kukua Festival and who are really involved in looking after Mother Earth and the ocean there. And so I felt like I would have something to share on the conservation tip, because Cristina over there is just crushing it.
I am impressed.
You approve?
Yeah, we need a lot more Danny around the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, your work is just, it's so beautiful, and to be able to, I think, to be able to support conservation, and through your art, I think what you said earlier is just a perfect gateway for people to be drawn into the fact that look how beautiful this stuff is, and it's not going to be here if we don't take care of it. These photographs are going to be really
Requiem, hopefully not.
if they're no longer.
If we do our job right, Danny, well, our children will enjoy them, hopefully. No, but you're absolutely right. I don't remember a time in my life when I didn't care. It was not something that occurred to me. I've always had it inside me. Yeah. And I was being so surprised when people don't. Whenever a reporter says to me, "Hey, Danny, tell me, why do you care about the environment?" I'm like, really? You have to ask. Yeah. I mean, it shouldn't be an option. It should be something that we all feel very strongly. Sure. And that's all I wanted to do with my work. I just wanted to infect, as we lived through a pandemic, infect more people with the joy of nature, and just the understanding that we live in a very small planet, nowhere else to go.
Right.
Cristina, I wonder, us humans, we are productive creatures. We're creative creatures. We want to make stuff, right? And that's, I think, why we're so this capitalism, we're so obsessed with accumulating. How do we balance our desire to make and build and produce with against the fate of the environment that sometimes is hurt by that? It's a big question.
That's such an interesting question, Will, and I've never heard that question articulated exactly in that way, in the sense of the creative, but it's true. We are probably the most creative species on the planet, and that's why we have been able to get ahead on technology and all the tools that we have to make our lives better. You spoke about capitalism, and I think, it seems like such a good idea, and we've all grown to believe that that is the way that things should be. I really challenge us to imagine a different type of capitalism that doesn't rely so much in accumulating and making more and, growing an economy just for the sake of it. Because I feel like that current version of capitalism has really left humanity and nature both behind.
And it's now in direct opposition to healing through this pandemic as well, right?
Yeah, and there's a real danger that we're just going to go back to that, But, I know that all of us being at home stuck, and I never want to forget the big thing that we all did together, because we have demonstrated that when we put our minds and our hearts to something, we can actually create a huge difference. And people staying at home has reduced carbon emissions, has given animals a respite. And I hear the narrative that says, you know what, it didn't really matter that we all isolated at home. It was a big deal. It was a big sacrifice that we all did, and we saved hundreds of thousands of lives by doing it. I don't want to forget that.
Yeah.
We all sacrificed.
Danny, you've worked with so many musicians over the past decades and become close with many of them. And some of them have also been like passionate activists and advocates. And in a world now where it's almost sort of cool to be woke, so to speak, or impact driven, and there's a lot of lip service paid to it, who have you encountered that is truly and deeply passionate about a cause, whether it's the environment or something equally as important?
Well, I think Jack Johnson's a good example. The Kukua Festival and the Kukua Foundation. He's a guy who, you can hear people talk about it, and there are a lot of people who are doing good. Don't get me wrong, and I'll give you a list of those who do. I look at him and I watch his Instagram, and I see on Facebook, and I see what he's doing, and I've been to these events myself. He's actually on the, in the field. He's out there. He's pulling plastic off the beach, going on cruises in the ocean to make films about plastic pollution. He's, educating children and bringing whole classes of schools out onto the beach to clean the beach and to educate them how to clean up and how to grow their own food. I mean, it's just really amazing, and I really admire him. And for me, it goes back to Pearl Jam is the same way. They did a couple of huge shows recently, the home shows and away shows that were the money went to help the homeless in Seattle and really in America. And it was incredible to see. And as a young man, when I'm a Springsteen fan, of course, I'm from New Jersey, but I noticed, Bruce Springsteen always standing up for what he believed in, always giving back to the community and giving back quietly. All these bands give back quietly. A lot of times you don't even know that they're giving back. And it's really inspiring to me. And, I did a project with Dave Matthews Band recently, and I was, doing some research, and I went on their website to see, what they were contributing to the charities. It was like 100 charities, more than 100. The list I just kept scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And, even a little bit, it's like, it's nice to give to one charity and really give a lot, but to really parse it out and, you help a lot of people. It's really incredible. And, you think of, Kelly Curtis, who's Pearl Jam's manager, helping to create the Global Citizens concerts and create a ticketing system that gives back, $1 or $2 from each ticket, and encouraging all the artists that he works with and friends of theirs to give back, a portion of their ticket sales to Global Citizens, and all those initiatives. And I have to say, it's inspired me in a really big way. And I have a gallery in Asbury Park called Transparent Gallery, and we've been given this place hosted by iStar, who owns the Asbury Hotel there. And we saw an opportunity there to give back to the community, and me being inspired by Pearl Jam, Dave Matthews, Foo Fighters, Bruce Springsteen, on, to what can I do? What is it that I could do? And we hosted, the Boys and Girls Club of Monmouth County, and we, small charities that are doing well in the community, and we allowed them to have their fundraisers there, and we would help on social media, and we would raise money for this, or do be a drop off for clothing drives and things like that. And there are small things, and you can get overwhelmed with what big thing can I do, but if you can even do a small thing, even just ask your elderly neighbor at this point, I'm going to the store, can I get you something? I mean, we all have to start thinking that way. And I'm inspired by those people. I'm inspired by what Christina's doing. And I think that, we all have to start thinking that way.
What it comes down to, Will, really, it's asking yourself what my values are. And I think we all know, we all talk about our values, and then aligning your resources, the resources of your life, which is not just money. Your resources are intellectual, they're compassion, their community, their time, energy, all of those things have to align with those values. And if at the end of the day, you're not contributing and giving back in accordance to those values, you start getting this huge sense of emptiness. And that emptiness is filled out with junk that we must buy to make ourselves feel better. And all of that, feeling that sense of being enough to be able to give back is called enoughness, and we've been practicing this last few weeks living with less because we had no choice. And guess what? It wasn't so bad, We can do a lot. We can feel a lot better giving back than buying stuff.
Yeah. Cristina, I wonder about marketing all this, though, because the irony here is that a lot of what you talk about is actually marketing, using the capitalism to market the things that are going to help come back and help the world. So how do you make something as broad and kind of like environmentalism, like these big scary things, how do you make them appealing to the average person?
It really starts, and I'm going to age myself by doing this, but I've been working in environmental stuff for 30 years now. And it took me a while to recognize what was happening, but I came to realize that if you look at the philanthropy input, and America is the most philanthropic country in the world. We Americans combined donate $420 billion a year to charity. It's remarkable. But of that money, 32% goes to religious institutions, and then it goes to health, education, arts, humanities, all of it very important. At the bottom of the pyramid, 1.8% goes to a bucket called environment, and that includes all of the ocean, all of the rainforest, all of the species of life on Earth, plus climate change and dogs, cats, and horses. So pretty clearly, if we care about saving our planet, we better start praying because the resources are simply not there. I mean, there's a huge misalignment in how we're allocating our resources to our values. And I started looking deeper into it and realizing that the big conservation organizations, the Sierra Clubs, all those environmental groups, whatever money they have, they only dedicate 4% of their overall budget to communications. And 90% of that is to do fundraising. So the message about how important our planet is, how this planetary, discipline of protecting our little spaceship that's carrying us through the universe, all of that got lost. If you talk to most people, they don't understand why biodiversity is important, why having resilience in the system through diversity is what allows us to live here. And these are basic lessons that, some of us learned them in school, but they're not taught anymore. So the ecology of being a human on planet Earth has been forgotten. And so I've kind of dedicated my life to making the pie that's dedicated to communications and marketing of that idea a little more robust. And I've done it through photography and through my relationships, but so much more needs to be done.
Well, let's talk about photography, because that's, after all, what you both are known for. A photograph, here I am, I'm legally blind, right? I don't see photographs the same way people do. And yet you've talked a lot about photos being a story. And I wonder, how is a photo more than just a photo? And I want to hear from both of you guys on this, and maybe you guys can compare notes about this a little bit. Cristina, what's your initial reaction?
When I started my career as a photographer, I remember thinking, there's certain images, like the one that you just showed me, Danny, of Willie Nelson, they become iconic symbols of our culture and of our times. And when I say to you, Che Guevara, I know exactly the photograph that you both are thinking about. And if I say napalm, Vietnam, I know exactly the photograph that you're thinking about. Photography has a way of, you internalize it into your subconscious and it becomes part of your understanding of the world. Video is different because it comes through here and it leaves through there, but a photograph, stays with you.
Danny, what do you think? How is a photo more than just a pretty thing to look at?
Well, I really loved Cristina's explanation. That was great because you think of certain images that represent that person or that moment. I think it's a moment in time. It's a document. It's history for me. I think it's interesting. I took the photographs, as I said earlier, for the Nas Illmatic record. It's one of the legendary hip hop records of all time. I was young. I had never been to the projects before. I had gone to the Queensbridge projects to photograph him. He was very welcoming, and everybody there was super cool. They were, I think, excited to have a photographer there photographing their neighborhood hero. The album was very cinematic, and I really gravitated towards it, and I felt like my style was really important to and well suited to this story. I had never thought in a million years it would be one of the top 5, top 3 hip hop records of all time, and that people would look at those photos and think, "Oh my lord, like this is incredible." Did and they're interpreting all this stuff about the image and that. And in fact, I didn't know at the time that it was going to be a really kind of a classic and legendary image. So a photograph can be, can age like a fine wine, or, depending on what that person does historically in the future, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, it changes the way you look at the photograph. So in a way, filmmaking, as Christina said, is storytelling, and in its way, it's almost it's different. You have an opportunity to follow the story in a way that helps tell the story, rolls out the story. With a photograph, you have to tell the entire story in that one photograph.
When I see that photograph of Willie Nelson that you just showed me, and it's magnificent, I almost feel like it's Danny Clinch standing in the middle, and he's having a conversation with 2 different audiences. One is the subject, and you're the interpreter, and on the other side of the bridge is all the people looking at that photograph. And it is a fluid movement of information that you interpreted for us. It's such a beautiful thing you do, Danny.
Thank you. And I believe also it is open to interpretation of the viewer. It's like, what is your life experience going to tell you about that photograph?
The lens with which you look at it, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. How has your life experience formed the way you're looking at a beautiful image of, some wildlife, whether it's, maybe a polar bear or like a beautiful elephant, as I see it. And if you're a hunter, you might look at it differently than someone like myself.
And you look at it at the menu.
Exactly.
It's a good point.
So it's interesting, everybody brings their own life experience to it. It's the same as a film, and the same in a song. It's like I hear people be asked that question, well, what did you mean by that song? And then I hear them, I can hear it in their voice. They're like, I'm not gonna, they may not be saying this, but they're probably saying to themselves, I'm not going to tell you. Let your own life experience tell you what this song's about.
Exactly. And we all interpret it to suit whatever emotion we need. So would you say, I always try to make my photographs a little bit of a bridge of empathy to the natural world, just to create relationships through those images that remind us of our relationships as humans. And I'm not trying to anthropomorphize, I'm just trying to build a relationship.
One of the notes I made to my own self when you say that, the empathy that you show in your photographs and the respect that you show your subjects is what I admire a lot about your photographs, Cristina, is like everything you photograph, you do with respect. It's like the women's series, the children, the wildlife, even the landscapes, like everything sort of has like this, it's respect, and there's even humor in it, and like it's something
something you just said about working in the projects and photographing the hero of that place in such an important way. Danny, is about returning dignity and power to people that have been marginalized and disempowered and ignored, and saying, look at it through my eyes and see how important and beautiful it looks. And people start seeing themselves in a different way. It's a magical thing that happens.
It's really interesting to think about celebrities and musicians who we adore as marginalized, or no, I'm not saying you saying that, but I'm just musing here. Like, Danny, you've said before, you photograph wildlife in a sense.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I wonder, is it important for us to have empathy for celebrities?
I mean, I think everyone deserves empathy, and it's like I think they, you can certainly there's an exception to every rule, and someone can act a certain way, and maybe they don't deserve it. From my point of view, they do. I mean, I'm a photographer who likes to show people in their best, most soulful light. And I think there are other photographers who I admire, like Avedon, for example, like an Avedon portrait. He wasn't always looking for the beauty. He was sometimes looking for the utmost ugliness of a portrait. And I appreciate those portraits. I don't, it's not my approach often, and there's always an exception to the rule. But just thought I'd point that out, that everybody has a different sensibility as to how they're portraying their subjects. I like respect and empathy, and I want to capture a moment that really reveals something that's soulful and that feels like you actually might get to know them a little bit, even a celebrity.
Humanity, fellow human. Yeah.
A musician.
Yeah, that's what I meant by marginalized. A lot of celebrities come from, less than affluent communities. They rise because of their talent, but I love it, especially when celebrities go back to where they came from to give back.
Do you ever find yourself seeking out the ugliness of nature, or what we've done to nature in your work to show that side of it as opposed to showing empathy?
I do it, and I think I tend to overdo it. I just don't show ugly. I show you the starving polar bear, and I get sucked into the viral vortex of the ugly internet. But absolutely, one of my favorite storytellers is Dr. Martin Luther King. And when you hear his most famous speech, of course, I Have a Dream, he doesn't start by saying, I have a nightmare. He takes you through this vision that he has. He articulates an idea of a better planet. And I try to do the same with my photographs. I try to show what our planet should and could look like. But then Dr. King reminds us of what it is like today and all the work that we have ahead of us to make it better and bright. And at key inflection moments, he takes it back to just how ugly and perilous and dangerous it is. And I try to do that with my narrative. It's a very careful balance of saying, it's hopeful, it's beautiful, but that's not all I see. I also see this other side. I post a photograph of the bushmeat markets in Africa, a man that's roasting a mandrill, looks very much like a human child. It's horrible. And my followers get upset with me because I'm showing them, the ugly side of the work I do. And I feel like we have to see it, It's not fair for us to recoil from the horror. We have to share it. And that's Susan Sontag. I don't know if you ever met her, Danny, but Susan wrote about, the pain of others. And it's our responsibility to share a little bit of that. But you have to do it with a dropper.
Yeah.
Dropper. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Something you said, Cristina, reminded me of something I saw of you on stage once, admitting what you felt in your life was a massive failure.
Oh, yeah.
This trip you took to the Amazon, and I wonder if you could just briefly tell us about that failure, but also talk about admitting failure in general. And I'd like to hear from Danny on this too.
Yeah, Danny will, you'll understand this feeling, when you're a new photographer and you have this huge imposter syndrome, you don't understand how this opportunity has been given to you. And I was sent to the Amazon on my first expedition solo to photograph this village that was going to be heavily impacted by a dam. So my job, is no different than Danny's. You go into a community and you try to bring a little piece of the humanity to help people understand that we're not just talking a wall of cement. We're talking about families and mothers who are not educated and whatever. And I was super nervous. So I was making the easy, cheesy, super easy portraits, trying to just, come back with something that my editors could look at. When one afternoon I saw these women coming up from the river, and one of them had a brand new baby. And I thought, oh, isn't that amazing? They're probably coming from the river where this baby just took its first bath, and it was probably part of an important ritual where a baby becomes one with the river. And where was I? I missed the whole thing. Such a newbie. I had no idea what I was doing. So I was starting to make a plan and thinking, okay, in the morning, I'm going to go find her and I'm going to fix this. I'm going to ask her to give the baby another bath and I'll photograph it and that'll be the end of it. But in the morning when we woke up, as I started asking around, they said to me, well, no, the baby died. It didn't live through the night. And I was so upset, and when I remember this, it really embarrasses me because I was not so upset about the baby dying. I was upset about my own failure as a photographer. Mm-hmm. Like, oh my God, and by the time I realized what was happening, the baby had already been buried and I had missed that too. And at this moment, I'm starting to think, why did I come here? They should have sent somebody who knows how to do this better than I can. I'm going to let everybody down and this dam is going to be built and it's going to be my fault. And I'm having this conversation internally when I see somebody coming towards me, and it's the mother of the baby. And she's bawling, she's screaming, and she has a machete in her hand and she's hitting her head and there's blood coming out and she's covered in mud. As she comes closer to me, I see that she has her baby in her arms. And this poor woman, in her sorrow had dug out the baby from its grave and was cradling it around. And that's when it hit me, I was a young mother as well. And I thought about my children at home. And I stood there with my camera, paralyzed, not knowing what to do. And I just didn't want to impose on her, Danny. I didn't want to put my camera on her face. And I didn't take any pictures. And, it's a big failure because you are sent down to do a job. And as you become a more mature photographer and you understand these challenges, you're better equipped to deal with them emotionally to actually do the job. Mm-hmm. But I was so young, I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah, well, you live and learn, it's you make your mistakes and you try not to make them again.
Yeah, because I thought, I thought about the photograph of the napalm, that changed the conversation about Vietnam. Yeah. And I thought if I had taken that photograph of this woman, maybe it would have made it to the newspaper. I don't know. Maybe we could have sparked some controversy that would have shifted the conversation. Yeah. And I didn't have courage.
I want to know why admit that failure on stage? And why is it important for us as creative people to admit our failures?
I think especially young people today, they glorify their achievements without admitting their failures. And it's all part of the journey of both being a human and being an artist. And Danny will tell you more than I will that being a successful photographer is all about failure. 99% of the time, things do not work like we wanted. It's that 1% that really counts. But the better stories in the 99.
Danny, does anything come to mind? Do you get, what percentage of your photography do you think are successes, and how do you cope with failure?
Well,
or do you have a different viewpoint on it?
Yeah, for me, that's a moment that Cristina had that's, life in rock and roll pales in comparison to that. But I think what it brings to me in my mind is, as part of this discussion, which I think if we're talking to younger photographers and we're talking to people about like what is it that you can do, how do you handle yourself in that situation, etc. I think about the phrase like sink or swim, and it's a phrase that I've heard a bunch, but recently it just sort of like it reminded me of the first time I got to photograph like Bob Dylan, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, first of all, is he going to show up? And when he does show up, am I prepared? Here's a guy who's been photographed by all of my heroes. You think of David Garr and Barry Feinstein and Annie Leibovitz, etc. And what's my impact going to be on him? And I think that you just have to let your instincts take over. And I think even my early assignments, like one of my first assignments for Spin magazine was photographing this hip hop band called Third Base. And I went down there and I said to myself, am I going to do this or am I not? Like, I think I'm going to know by the end of this shoot, does this photograph, if this is successful, it's going to look like it belongs in that magazine. And I just, at a certain point, you have to stop overthinking it and get to the task of taking the photograph. And so it is kind of a sink or swim situation. You're there, and you're just
Make
like,
it till you make it, baby.
yeah. I just dove in, and I ended up getting a photograph I was really proud of for the third base story, and the Bob Dylan thing worked out great. I made a really wise decision in the fact that I chose this location called the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, and there's a lot of history behind it. It was where Robert Kennedy was assassinated in the kitchen there, and where the Coconut Grove room was there. It was where the Rat Pack used to hang out, and like Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis and Sinatra and all these guys, and they, Dylan was super excited about the history of this place, and so he, I didn't realize. But quickly I realized how important it was to him to be in such a cool place. And instead of getting him for like 3 hours, he stayed for like 6 hours. So,
Oh, wow.
but I think it is a matter of of trusting yourself, and I keep thinking back to the image that you feel that you missed there, and it's like it really is. I can imagine that weighing heavily on you for quite some time.
But sometimes I feel also, because the work that we do is different, right? So when you're shooting in the field, I have very little control of the circumstances. But when I decided to tell that story, well, I was thinking, I don't have the photograph, but if I can paint the picture by telling the story and allow people to imagine it, perhaps it's even more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's well, and I want to talk about the tools we use to tell those stories. You kind of alluded to it, Danny, because you talked about location, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes tools are not as simple as, oh, my tool is my camera, right? But what are the tools that you would say, if you had to pick your most important tool, that's not just a camera, or what would you say it might be? And whichever one of you has an idea first can jump in.
When I started my career, I wanted to be a wildlife photographer just because I love animals. And when I started hanging out with famous photographers and going to all these nature photography conferences, you hang out with people with like Franz Lanting or Art Wolf or Tom Mangelson, and you realize the sacrifice it takes to take those pictures, weeks, months in a tent somewhere in the Arctic, alone, mosquitoes, and I thought, I think I'm more interested in the place where humans and nature meet, and I started taking indigenous people's photographs. Mm-hmm. And then I discovered my most important tool, and that is that I really like being with people and that I really have a sense of humanity. And so I was able to go in without judgment, and sometimes you spend a week hanging out with people before the camera even comes out. So it's that ability to become part of a community that has been the most important tool.
That's interesting, because in a sense I'm doing the same thing, right? I'm going into a backstage area with a band, or where there's all these different personalities. You don't know what kind of day they had, all those sort of things, and you kind of get to a point where you want to be able to show respect and not cross the line, but you don't want to be so passive that you miss an opportunity because you haven't been aggressive enough. And the important tool that I have, again, is not the camera. It's the fact that I grew up in a household. My mother and father, they treated everybody equally. My dad would always say, I talked to the garbage man and I would talk to the president, and I would treat them the same way. I'm not treating this person different than that person. And he actually said that often when I was a kid growing up. They never were judgmental. My father, funny enough, was also the guy, you'd go to a wedding or you'd be at a gathering somewhere and there'd be one sort of crazy ass person that's there, and everybody's kind of they're just kind of keeping away. I'm not going near that guy. My dad would settle up next to him and go, "Hey man, what's going on?" He wants to know what this madman is up to.
Yeah, almost like a sixth sense, right? To have that sense for.
Yeah. So I guess I feel like I give people respect, and like when you're talking to someone that's you admire so much, like a Bob Dylan or a Bruce Springsteen or you know, anyone for that matter, even someone who's not famous. You know, you kind of don't want to. You don't want to. You know, you want to. I want to treat them like a regular person or find our common ground and show them certainly respect. But I think you know a lot of people are just like get frightened in a way where they can't act themselves. You know? So
And they used to
I
think,
feel like I'm able to, you know, to go into one of those situations and still just be myself and, you know, show respect and find our common ground and take some photos.
my dad used to say stuff like that too.
People can sense when you're like, when you're putting on airs, right?
Yeah.
They just have a feeling like there's something not quite right.
A lack of authenticity, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it really does reflect in what they're giving you back. You know, I've seen some photographs of, you know, artists that I gotten to know. And I've seen everything's great about the light's really good. You know, the composition's nice. Like you know, they're dressed cool, and you could just see in the eyes like there's a disconnect there that doesn't seal the deal of a really great photograph.
Yeah.
I think all that stuff to me, what's important in a photograph is the moment and the emotion and soul of it. Like I'll sacrifice lighting and composition
For
you
emotion
know, for
every
a
day.
moment. You know?
Yeah, me too.
I want to go back in time a little bit and ask about mentors and people you learned from, because I know, Danny, you, I don't know so much from your perspective, Cristina, but Danny, I know you started out interning or something for Annie Leibovitz, right?
Yeah, yeah. I
What
was
did you learn from Annie?
well. I learned a lot from her. She wasn't one to chat up her assistants, chat people up. She always came in. She was on a mission. She was like not talking to anybody. She'd just go in, and she was really, really obsessed with what she wanted to do. And I'm that way too. I have a different approach to it, but we all have our own approach. But like, you know, it showed me how important it was to just be really kind of like, and I knew I was as obsessed with my work as it looked like she was, but she never took no for an answer. She was always going for what she wanted to do, and she never settled, you know. And I really liked that about her, and I learned a lot from her in that way. And she was also really wonderful with people and getting them to relax and the poses she put them in and all those things. And you know, as a photographer, I really worked with a lot of really wonderful people. I worked with Annie. I worked with Stephen Meisel. I worked with Mary Ellen Mark.
Love Mary Ellen.
Yeah, me too. Timothy White, and like a lot of these people, I took what I felt suited my personality from them. You know, initially, like I wanted to be Annie Leibovitz, and I realized, well, I'm never going to be Annie. You know, and so I took what I loved about her work, and I brought it with me. And I took what I learned from Stephen Meisel, and I brought that with me, and Timothy, and I brought that with me, and I just little parts, and they all just became, you know, who I have become and who I am. And I think that's the way to do it. You have to realize, as a young photographer looking for my style, I was always struggling. What's my style? And then I realized, well, I like Tri-X black and white film. I like this 28 millimeter lens on this old Nikon, and I like being in the middle of stuff. I need to be right in the middle of it. I love music. I like cars. I like rock and roll, motorcycles. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, man, there's my style. You know, if you want someone to shoot some rock and roll, and you know, if you want someone to shoot Bruce Springsteen on a motorcycle, I'm your guy.
Yeah, I know that.
You know that my assistant now, a young man named John Kelsey, was Annie Leibovitz's assistant too. So,
Oh wow!
and now he works for me. So
Wow.
that is really good recommendation. But no, I learned in a different way because the thing that I do is kind of unique, you know, and there really wasn't a school for photographers doing environmental or conservation work. So the closest thing I had was nature photography and wildlife photography. And I would go to these conferences where photographers gathered to try to express my concern for nature and the environment. And I would raise my hand and say, hey, could we use our pictures to try to protect these places where we photograph? And it was pretty much a patriarchy, it's a bunch of middle-aged white men. And I was pretty much told to sit down and shut up. It's like, no, that's not what we do here, dear. So I started my own organization, but mentors along the way, when you become part of the National Geographic family, every single one of those photographers becomes your family. So people like Joel Sartori taught me so much about the business end of things. How do you show up to work and you only get paid when you show up to work? How do you invoice? How do you keep your hours? I mean, these are things that you don't learn in school. How do you make a submission? How do you create a portfolio? How do you write a letter to an editor? All these things are the little bits that get you closer. And then from other photographers, Paul Nicklin, who I ended up living with now, he was the first one to teach me underwater photography. I started taking pictures of animals, moved on to indigenous people, and then Paul put a housing in my hands. And it's a big set of skills that you need to be successful to take photographs underwater. Number one of which is, do not drown. try to keep breathing. But on top of that, the current is taking you, you're sinking, the water is cold or whatever, and you have to create an exposure and frame it and have a composition. So really difficult. But other photographers, people like Patricio Robles Gil in Mexico, taught me how to use images as tools in the environmental toolkit. So lots of mentors along the way, and I try to give back in the same way today. I often mentor, especially young women, because I don't know where it comes from, but there's a big obstacle in the way that women think about technology as a very threatening thing. Cameras are too complicated. It's not for me, or it's too dangerous to go out there, or it's just not the way that women are raised. So how do we eliminate that conversation to say, hey, anybody can do this?
Yeah, I was going to ask, that was going to be my next question about how do we make room now that we've had all these great mentors and we've been able to benefit from all this success? How do we make room for people who are on the outside and just feeling like, well, there's like you feeling like you were feeling when you raised your hand at those conferences in the very beginning? And you've kind of answered that a little bit, but I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on that as well.
Can you rephrase the question for me?
Well, just sort of in terms of how do we think about outsiders to our profession and people who might not feel like they have outside.
It's a painful thing. I mean, we all wear there, when you're the one sitting outside and wondering if that's ever going to be you.
Right. Do you have sort of younger folks who, how do you teach people the craft, or do you hope that people learn by watching, or is it a combination of things?
Well, I love sharing what I've learned with people, and I think, I used to, as a young photographer, be jealous and of other people and the work that they were doing and at this point I realized that, and I think most everybody at that age usually does, but I think now just sharing and showing support for people is important, and I think that I think about Instagram and how you can share information on social media, and that's cool. And I think my take on Instagram, people often ask me, well, do you like Instagram? Now everybody thinks they're a photographer, and I've always loved walking down the street wherever I am, whether it's New York City or in another country, and I was always so grateful that I could really just appreciate like some light coming, through a window, or a shadow on the ground, or just like the theater of life as you cruise down the street. And I felt like a lot of people didn't really, there were rare people who appreciated that and got to know it. And I think with Instagram and the fact that people are starting to look at the world in a different way because they want to post a cool photo on Instagram. And, maybe it's, hipped a couple of people to say, actually, I have a good eye and I really enjoy this, and I can make a career out of it, or even just I can have fun and make a strong hobby out of it, And the beauty of photography, as we know, is you could love wildlife and conservation, you could love rock and roll, you could love weddings, you could love food or still lives or whatever, and you can be obsessed by that stuff and make it your career and do something that you really love.
Yeah, I completely agree with Danny. And I try to mentor people, but one at a time doesn't really get us, move us very fast. So I do a lot of lecturing and I try to do a lot of webinars. And I don't teach photography. I mean, like the nuts and bolts of the camera and the composition, that's the easy part. It's the vision that you bring to the craft that's really difficult to understand when you're young. So I remember I gave a lecture recently, and a young Japanese woman came up to me afterwards and she touched my chest and she said to me, "Ikigai." And I didn't know what it was, so I looked it up. And Ikigai is a Japanese word that means finding your life's purpose. And you find it when you make a list of things that you love, and it's the confluence of four things. The things that you're really good at, which are also the things that you love to do. And these are the things that you get paid, that are going to make you some money. And these are the things that the world needs. And the confluence of all those fours is your ikigai. And photography is such a big, vast discipline, right? When you're a beginning photographer, your first camera, you want to be a street photographer, you want to make money and do commercial work, you want to go photograph celebrities, and oh my God, there's a polar bear. If you have some discipline in making these lists of things, you'll find where your unique brand of photography lives. And it's a painful career if you're trying to build a business from it. So you better be enthusiastic and passionate and excited every morning when you get out of bed to go and do this thing that you love and that you're really good at, because otherwise you're not going to get paid and you're not going to change the world. So there you go. Find your ikigai.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
I love that. I always say that any of my greatest mentors, anyone who has made the biggest difference for me, would never presume to call themselves a mentor. Right? Like, and those are the great ones, like
the better ones for sure.
Yeah.
Little nuggets of things you've learned along the way.
I want to talk about affecting people in mass, and I'm also checking to the time and to make sure we don't have any desperately nagging questions in the comments. But I think I want to know a little bit about the only one platform and the elevator pitch for that, and why someone who just casually thinks, yeah, I care about the environment, should go and join.
Yeah, when Paul and I started Sea Legacy, our nonprofit, it was really just a desire to do more. And we were working for National Geographic at the time, and it just felt like you work for 2 years on an article for the magazine. It appears there for a month and then it's gone and nothing really happens. And so we created Sea Legacy because we wanted to do more. And in the beginning, the only tool we had was our social media. So we started growing it and posting stories, And it was like a scene out of Forrest Gump when he starts running across the country, and he looks behind him and there's millions of people following him. Well, we knew we had found a way to communicate that was striking a chord with people, and they were coming for the stories. But then we thought, we could probably activate these people to take action together. And I was inspired by the Arab Spring. That was a Twitter storm that brought Mubarak down. And I thought, if you can, create a passionate story that gets galvanized action on a single issue, you can mobilize a lot of people. So we started building a technology tool. And I wanted it to be led with storytelling. So with beautiful video stories, writing, photography. But imagine that you're watching your favorite Netflix show and you're really invested in the character. And at that moment, you're given an opportunity to take an action. You can help this person or you can help this animal. So that's what we're building.
Oh, wow.
The only one platform is, I like to think about it as a marriage between Netflix and change.org. It's in the service to the ocean community. So we're hoping to tell the stories of many ocean conservation groups, especially the smaller ones, and to give people that are watching this content opportunities to take action and to know that they're part of a very big community of other people who are taking the same action, because that peer validation is really important to move the environmental needle. So Only.one is going to be launched at the end of June. It starts with Sea Legacy, but there's going to be many other conservation organizations telling their stories there and giving people who are not even close to the ocean an opportunity to take significant actions every day.
Wonderful.
Only.one.
Wonderful. And Danny, you're just, in terms of the projects that are on your mind, you're continuing to run your festivals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have a new book out, I think, as well, right?
Well, I have a book out. It's been out for a while, but it's called Still Moving, and it was.
Let's see it, Danny.
Yeah, let's see it.
Take a picture of you with your book.
Oh yeah, screenshot.
So beautiful, so beautiful.
Still Moving.
Oh yeah.
And Tom Waits on the back.
I'll show you my book.
Oh yeah, man, I love that book.
Yeah, good guys.
I'm gonna send you a copy of my book, and I want a copy of yours, Danny.
Absolutely, deal. Done.
We're almost at time here, but oh, sorry, Danny, were you going to say something? One other thing?
I just wanted to shout out Paul Nicklin for having the cover of the new Pearl Jam record, Gigaton.
Oh,
What an album. Oh my gosh.
So good.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Dipping his toes in rock and roll. I don't know. I might have to come over to your side and shoot some wildlife.
We would love that, Danny. But that is exactly the perfect confluence of creative, purposeful people coming all together in a single conversation, which is also the most important conversation of our life. So
yeah. I could see Jeff Ament and Ed and Stone and Mike and Matt, like, these guys really, I'm sure they saw that photograph and realized how perfect it was for the record that they made and what they stand for.
Yeah, exactly what they stand for. Their values aligned with their compassion, their resources. So good.
Guys, this has been such a awesome conversation. Thanks for spending the time with us this afternoon.
Of course.
It's been amazing. And Danny Clinch, I'm your biggest fan. So excited to be here with you today.
Likewise, I really appreciate your work, and I look forward to the book trade.
Yeah, it's coming. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, just vamp.